Center how on the VI digital electronic connection. We appreciate your participation today, and we would ask our Director, Hal Greer, to give us an overview of what we're going to be doing today.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Madam Vice Chairwoman, and members of the Commission. I'm Hal Greer, the Staff Director of JLARC. There are 3 items on the agenda this morning. JLARC staff will first present the findings from the review of the organizational structure and staffing of VITA. Then JLARC staff will present an interim report on the review of the Virginia Employment Commission. And finally, the General Assembly's Actuarial will present the findings from its review of the state's employee health insurance program. Mr. Chairman, first up is our review of VITA. I'll turn it over to Kimberly Sartay, who oversees our ongoing oversight and oversaw this review. Kimberly?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission. As you may recall, JLARC has ongoing oversight of VITA, and as part of this oversight, the Commission passed a motion last October directing staff to review VITA's organizational structure and staffing. The timing for this review was very good, Mr. Chairman, because VITA underwent a large change in 2018 to provide its infrastructure services through a multi-supplier model, and they've also undergone several organizational changes in recent years. As you will hear in a moment, our overall findings are pretty positive. However, we do have some important recommendations for how VITA can improve its organizational structure with respect to project management and also address several staffing concerns. I would now like to introduce Jamie Bitts, who is our Chief Legislative Analyst for ongoing oversight and who will be presenting the findings and recommendations from our review. And after Jamie, Nelson Mote, the Commonwealth's Chief Information Officer, will also be providing you with a brief update. Jamie?
Thank you, Jamie. Welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Morning, members of the Commission as well. As Kimberly said, my name is Jamie Bitts, and I will be presenting the findings and recommendations from our review of VITA's organizational structure and staffing. Danielle Childress worked with me on this review, and I do want to thank her for all of her hard work. This slide just shows you the motion that you approved last October. I won't go through this, though, in the interest of time. Just to briefly summarize our findings, we found that VITA's organizational structure is generally reasonable, but it does create potential conflicts of interest for project management oversight. VITA staff are satisfied with the agency, and turnover is relatively low. VITA lacks enough IT security staff and has difficulty recruiting for certain highly technical positions. And the agency does rely heavily on contractors to supplement its overall workforce. Last year, we did a follow-up review of VITA's implementation of its multi-supplier model. We made 8 recommendations in that report, and at this point, every recommendation is either fully or partially implemented. Some of the key recommendations are shown here on this slide. I won't go through these in detail, but I will refer you to an appendix in our current report that provides much more information about the status of each of these. Mr. Chairman, I have 3 parts to my presentation this morning, and I'll start first with some very brief background information on VITA. Now, a key responsibility of VITA is to provide infrastructure services to state agencies. Those services include PCs and laptops, network services, including internet and phone, email, as well as security services. VITA is also responsible for conducting oversight in 4 key areas of the state's IT. Those are security, project management, procurements, and then IT strategic planning. As you may already know, VITA transitioned to a multi-supplier service model in 2018. It now has contracts with 8 separate suppliers, 1 for each of the infrastructure services that it provides. And one of those suppliers acts as the integrator and is responsible for coordinating the services of the other suppliers. This slide just shows you VITA's total annual budget You can see that its operating budget for FY22 is $63 million. Most of that is for overseeing the provision of infrastructure services and then carrying out the oversight responsibilities that I just talked about. And I'll now turn to VITA's organizational structure. Organizational structure is a key factor affecting an agency's success. For example, having a good structure can help ensure that staff have clear responsibilities and that the agency is focused on its key functions. There are a number of other factors that can affect agency success, and those include things like qualified and motivated staff and then having appropriate processes in place. I should note at this point that customer agencies do continue to have concerns about VITA's infrastructure services. Some of those concerns may be best addressed by having the right operational processes in place, and that's something that we did not look at in detail as part of this review. Now, in looking at VITA's organizational structure, we found that it's generally reasonable. Oops, I apologize, I missed a slide. In terms of VITA's organizational structure, the agency is led by the state's Chief Information Officer, or CIO, and about 3/4 of their staff are overseen by the Chief Operating Officer, or COO. Now, in terms of VITA's organizational structure, we found that it's generally reasonable. The structure reasonably divides agency responsibilities by grouping similar functions together. At a high level, the overall structure is similar to the two other states that use multi-supplier models. Those are Georgia and Texas. And VITA has made a number of improvements to its organizational structure in recent years, most notably creating the position of COO, and then also bringing its human resource function back in-house. But we also found that VITA's organizational structure creates potential conflicts of interest for the oversight of project management. Now, it's important to remember that VITA has both operational and oversight responsibilities. It needs an effective organizational structure in order to minimize any potential conflicts of interest between those two responsibilities. Those conflicts of interest can make VITA's oversight less independent or less objective. Now, the organizational structure that VITA has provides the level of independence that's needed for its security, procurement, and strategic planning oversight, but it doesn't provide the independence that's needed for its project management oversight. Now, project management oversight is a critical VITA function. It's intended to make sure that large IT projects stay on schedule and within their budget and scope. That oversight is carried out by VITA's Project Management Division, or PMD. And this slide just shows you where PMD is in VITA's organizational structure. So you can see that it's one of several units within a larger operations directorate under the COO, and it's also 3 levels below the CIO. And it's this placement of PMD in the organizational structure that creates potential conflicts of interest. The COO through PMD is responsible for VITA's project management oversight. That includes IT projects managed by VITA itself, as well as projects managed by other agencies. And under VITA's current structure, there are potential conflicts of interest for oversight of both types of projects. The COO also has operational responsibilities, and so, for example, operations staff under the COO are responsible for implementing VITA's IT projects. And those dual roles could put the COO in the position of having to prioritize conflicting roles of, on the one hand, continuing a project that may be behind schedule or over budget, or on the other hand, addressing those delays and cost overruns through effective oversight. Now, with IT projects managed by other agencies, those projects are also are often relying heavily on VITA's infrastructure services, which the COO also oversees. And that can also create, a potential conflict of interest with this oversight. So for example, when PMD is assessing whether problems on a project are due to the way that an agency is managing a project, or they're due to the infrastructure services that VITA is providing, the COO may face that conflict of interest as well. And so we have two recommendations aimed at ensuring that PMD has the independence it needs to provide effective project management oversight. One is that VITA should elevate PMD to its own directorate, and then two, that VITA should develop a policy that requires PMD to report directly to the CIO on any project where there are potential conflicts of interest that could arise. Mr. Chairman, I'll now turn to VITA's management and staffing. First, here we found that VITA staff are generally satisfied with the agency and that staff turnover is relatively low. We surveyed VITA staff and more than 80% reported being satisfied with VITA as an employer and satisfied with their job overall at VITA. Now, it's not surprising then that turnover among VITA's classified staff is lower than other state agencies. VITA's turnover was just 7.5% in 2020, and that's well below the statewide average. And current staff do appear to be committed to staying at the agency. And we also found that VITA's We also found that VITA staff are diverse overall, but that the diversity of its managers should be improved. The diversity of VITA staff overall is roughly similar to Virginia's population, particularly in terms of its percentages of women and Black staff. However, white staff are disproportionately represented among its managers. They represent 80% of managers, but just 62% of non-managers. VITA's leadership has acknowledged the need for increasing the diversity of its managers, and they are taking steps to address that. And so, for example, they did recently complete their One Virginia Diversity and Equity Strategic Plan, which was required under legislation passed by the 2021 General Assembly. They also added a position focused on diversity and inclusion at the agency. Now, in looking at staffing levels at VITA, we found that the agency lacks enough IT security staff to carry out its responsibilities. VITA's security responsibilities have increased in recent years. That's partly because of the transition to the multi-supplier model, which has meant that the security group has more contractual deliverables and obligations to review. But the other factor driving increased workload is just the increasingly complex cybersecurity threats that the state faces. And there have been several cybersecurity attacks on state IT systems in recent years. VITA's security staffing has more than doubled over the past 10 years, but that still has not been adequate to handle the increased workload. Security staff consistently expressed concerns about staffing levels when we surveyed and interviewed them, and less than 7% said that security staffing levels are sufficient for the current workload. Now, because it doesn't have enough security staff, VITA's security group is not able to keep pace with all of the infrastructure changes that agencies are requesting, and make sure that those changes are consistent with the state's security standards. And that ultimately increases the risk of a cybersecurity breach in the Commonwealth. And so we have a recommendation that VITA should develop a plan to fully staff its security group, including the number of additional positions that are needed, as well as the roles that they would fill, and then provide that plan by December 15th before the upcoming legislative session. Now, compared to VITA's security group, staffing levels are less of a concern in the rest of the agency. For example, you can see on this slide that 63% of security staff said staffing levels were not sufficient, but less than 1/3 of staff in the rest of the agency said this. We also looked at whether VITA has the staffing expertise that it needs to carry out its responsibilities, and we found that it generally has adequate staff expertise, but that the agency does have difficulty recruiting for some highly technical positions. Now, VITA is able to hire qualified staff for most positions. 80% of staff said that their directorate has the expertise that's needed, and just 11% of VITA's managers said that they're not able to recruit or retain qualified staff. But VITA does have difficulty recruiting for some highly technical positions, and those include cloud computing positions, as well as enterprise architecture positions. Now, one of the strategies that VITA uses to recruit technical staff, highly technical staff, is to hire contractors. The downside to that approach is that VITA loses institutional knowledge when they leave, and VITA's contractors typically have a much shorter tenure than classified staff. Now, VITA has made relatively limited use of the tools available under the state's compensation policy. That policy provides a number of options that agencies can use to better recruit and retain qualified staff. Those include options like alternative higher pay bands that allow agencies to better compete with private sector salaries. And so we have a recommendation that VITA and the Department of Human Resource Management should conduct a joint compensation review for those highly technical positions, and then develop strategies for recruiting and retaining staff. And we also found that in addition to hiring contractors for more technical positions, that VITA relies heavily on them to supplement its overall workforce. And so about 1/4 of VITA's workforce is contractors, and they're used in a wide variety of roles, including short-term technical roles as well as administrative assistants. Now, contractors have given VITA the flexibility to fill hard-to-staff positions and develop expertise in emerging IT fields, but they do tend to be more expensive than classified staff, and you can see on this slide just how the median compensation for contractors and classified staff compares. We did also find examples where VITA has classified staff and contractors performing similar functions, but where the contractors are being paid higher salaries. Going forward, VITA should use contractors in a more strategic manner. Their default staffing approach for many positions has been to use contractors, and that includes long-term positions and also positions where it's been feasible to hire classified staff. And more than 70% of the managers responding to our survey said that they would prefer to have classified staff rather than contractors, often because of concerns over higher turnover. And so we do have 2 recommendations here. One is that VITA should develop guidelines for when it will hire contractors, and 2, that it should develop a plan for replacing contractors replacing contractors with classified staff that's consistent with those guidelines. Mr. Chairman, slide 41 just summarizes our key findings. I won't read through those just in the interest of time, but I am happy to answer any questions that there may be.
Jamie, thank you very much for that report. It certainly differs in tone from VITA reports that we've had over the years, but we appreciate your continued oversight. That was intended to be humorous. Members have questions.
Mr. Chairman.
Let's see, Senator Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was paying attention to the comments and observations that were made as far as contractors against classified employees. How vigorous is the recruitment process within VITA to fill these positions?
To fill these positions with classified staff?
Yes, sir. And in general?
They are certainly using, I would say, the typical process to go through the recruitment for classified staff. In some cases, that involves reposting a position, in particular for positions that are more difficult to recruit. They also are, I think in some cases where it is a difficult to recruit position, taking a look at additional recruitment strategies that they might be able to use to improve their outreach for those positions. In terms of contractors, the process they're using there is just to use a contingent labor contract and essentially go and find an individual with the right expertise.
Senator, if you're asking, though, if they can be more, I guess, aggressive in recruiting classified staff for these positions, we do think they can. We think that that's why we have the recommendations that more could be done to fill these with classified staff, which will, in general, have a longer tenure and probably be less costly.
Senator Norman.
A follow-up question. What can we from the General Assembly do to assist them or encourage them to be more assertive in their recruitment efforts?
Well, I think we've got a couple of recommendations directed at that, and one is making sure that they have clear guidelines on when they are using contractors, and making sure in particular that they're using contractors only when it is for a short-term role or function. We've also got recommendations aimed at improving their ability to recruit and retain qualified staff, and so one recommendation is to work with DHRM to develop better strategies to make better use, essentially, of the state's compensation policy. I will also say that this is something that because we have ongoing oversight of VITA, this is something that we will continue to watch very closely.
And we're certainly happy to report back to you in the future, in the near future, just to let you know how things are going on this front.
Further questions or discussion? We
Mr.
have
Chairman.
Mr. Moe also with us from VITA, and Mr. Moe, if you'd want to come forward, we'd be pleased to hear from you. Do you have a question? Yeah.
Good morning, Chairman Plum, Vice Chairman Howell, Madam Speaker, members of the Commission. I'm Nelson Moe, Chief Information Officer of the Commonwealth and Head of the Virginia Information Technologies Agency. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to be with you today, and I want to thank the Commission and staff and the opportunity to address these issues. Okay, thank you. First thing I'd like to talk about is about VITA. VITA's mission is to deliver sustainable and effective results for our customer agencies through innovative, efficient, and secure technology. For the past several years, our agency has adopted a mindset that aligns with new technology model and organizational structure. At VITA, we are laser focused on the customer experience and value to bring to customers, Virginia's government agencies. At VITA, we enable government connections. It's always top of mind that technology enables the Commonwealth's work. We are proud stewards of that responsibility, and our work is more critical than ever as Virginians increasingly depend on that technology in their daily lives. VITA's work over the last 7 years has made us only one of 3 states in the United States, in the nation, that have successfully transitioned to this multi-supplier model. That new model has won multiple national awards for Virginia, even at less than 2 years old. Virginia's leader in business and technology nationwide, and it's important that our technology resources and our efforts at VITA are ready to serve the Commonwealth at this high level. In addition to being #1 state in the nation for business, we're also ranked #1 in digital infrastructure, cybersecurity, and ranked among the top states in the Digital State Survey conducted by the Center of Digital Government. I'd like to work on some key focus areas, specifically continuous investment in people and workforce, progress we made in the platform and services, and then future areas for technology investment. The first of which is people. People are our most valuable assets. We are pleased to learn that JLARC staff has determined that our staffing organization structure is a sound approach. The report noted high employee engagement and low attrition rates at VITA compared to other state agencies, and we intend to build on that success. We must continue to enhance our ability to forecast long-term needs and hire full-time employees to meet them. We recently, as the report mentioned, hired a diversity, we brought in HR into our organization, established a diversity advisory committee, and adopted the diversity, equity, inclusion strategic plan for immediate implementation. And we're implementing robust employee engagement programs so we can grow the next generation of public sector technology leaders. Next slide is customer satisfaction and service enhancement. This is a big one for us. We track customer metrics on an ongoing basis, measuring customer satisfaction, identifying key needs, and resolving issues. Overall customer satisfaction increased from roughly 20% in 2020 to over 56% a year later. That's a very positive trajectory, and we're deploying new impactful services to customers faster and at a higher quantity than previously possible under the old model. Several of these services are the first in the nation for the public sector. This includes technologies such as robotic process automation, which automates tasks that can be performed much more quickly and efficiently, which enables staff workers to focus on higher valued work. We're focused on continuing to deliver modern services that enable the business of the Commonwealth and have an attractive return on investment. We've also seen customer testimonials. As much as we like watching the numbers, we hear directly from the customers, and that's important. This slide shows some of those testimonials. We're extremely positive of the positive relationships we've developed in the past year, and they're committed to building upon those. Next slide is on sustainable successes and future investments. The network is the key. The Commonwealth Network is the backbone of how our agencies conduct their businesses and reach citizens. Demand has increased dramatically since the start of the pandemic, as needs are likely to grow as agencies continue to transition to hybrid and virtual work environments. We're working to support growing cloud workloads and demand and upgrades, but the network badly needs investment. Second, cybersecurity is increasingly critical too. We responded to over 66 million cyber attacks last year. We must remain vigilant and capable of protecting against future cyber threats. In addition to cybersecurity staffing recommended report, other VITA teams need additional staff resources as well. Our teams have been responding at full capacity, and investment is necessary to enhance our capabilities and fully realize the benefits of the multi-supplier model. In closing, I want to thank the Commission again for its support in our transformation efforts. We're dedicated to continuous improvement, and we look forward to future opportunities to share our message and our story and our progress with you. Please feel free to contact me or my staff with your questions or concerns. With that, I'm open for questions.
Questions of Mr. Moe? Yeah, Delegate Sickles.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What is your most significant challenge right now? And is there any agency of our government that does not think they're getting satisfactory IT services from your agency?
Thank you, Delegate Sickles, for that question. As I understand, what was the most concern I have or challenge that we have is my VITA as the CIO of the agency. I think it's really that second to last slide. It's really a combination of the increasing demand that agencies are pressing upon the network, much like traffic is on more and more on the roads. And every time you put up a new building, a new development, you put a traffic study. What's happened over the years is that we need to adjust both reliability and capacity of the network, and that will help a lot of the agencies be able to do the work and satisfy the citizens. But tied to that is the ability to us to address cybersecurity hits. Ransomware is forefront of my mind. We're actually in a pretty good state because we're in a consolidated effort. We consolidated services. We can draw on a lot of resources both on our national partners, the three-letter agencies, National Guard, because as a consolidated, that helps a little bit. But by having that technology investment, which we intend to pursue in the coming administration and coming budget bill, will help us address ransomware attacks. We call it the Zero Trust Framework. It basically allows us to protect assets both here in the campus and also from remote workers. So those are the two. They're tied in, I think, is capacity of the network and also being able to protect it.
Senator Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Going back to an earlier area, I mean, obviously, the Commonwealth of Virginia in all areas wants to hire the most skilled and best employees that we can possibly retain. My myopic perspective is particularly when we get into the IT world, that it's absolutely critical that we get the highest skilled workforce that we can because of the sophistication of it, because of the ongoing cyber attacks. I noted in the earlier presentation that it showed about a $12,000 a year differential between what the Commonwealth is paying and what private contractors are paying based on median income. And then on page 2 of your letter in response, you indicated the state government cannot compete with leading private sector entities on compensation. How do we address that issue?
So, Senator Norman, thank you very much for that question. I too also believe that we need to pursue highest trained staff for the Commonwealth for cybersecurity and networking. The efforts of my staff going forward and my agency going forward will be working with Department of Human Resources Management to look at the market and make sure we provide the right incentives for people to work for here for the Commonwealth in both compensation and benefits. So we're certainly going to embrace the JLARC's study's recommendation to move forward and review that with the professionals at Human Resources.
Senator Norman.
Follow up.
Yeah.
Other than compensation, what motivation can we provide to make up that delta between contractors and what the state is doing?
Well, from my perspective, what I do is I offer as we hire and retain staff, what draws people to public service. I think that's a driver. And so people come here to make a difference. That's why I joined it. That's why I've dedicated my life to this thing. So it's people making a difference that want to be part of something bigger than themselves. And at the state is where you actually make a difference in people's lives. That is a driver for us. So making them feel appreciated, Senator Norman, that's, I think, is a key factor in retention at the state level.
Other questions or discussion? Mr. Moe, we appreciate the cooperation you've shown us over the last several years as we've gone through this process of the single contractor source to the multiple. And I think the wisdom of having chosen to go that direction is proving itself out. So,
the Build Adapt strategy absolutely has helped us out through the pandemic. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, we look forward to continuing working with you and with our staff together to make further improvements. And we certainly appreciate the staffing issue. It's one that, in a highly technical field, affects private industry as well as public sector. So thank you, sir.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time.
Mr. Greer?
Mr. Chairman, the next item is an interim report on the review of the Virginia Employment Commission. The topics that will be covered today were selected because we believe they're the ones of greatest importance to the legislature and the public at this time, and because there are actions related to these topics that need to be taken now to improve the agency's performance and its responsiveness to the public and to employers. A theme that you will hear in the presentation is that while the agency could not have been fully prepared to respond to the pandemic, it could have been better prepared. And while operating in the extremely challenging public health environment created by COVID was understandably difficult, especially the ability to hire new staff, meaningful actions could have been taken sooner to respond to the public's needs. As you'll hear, 18 months into the pandemic, the agency is still overwhelmed by backlogs of claims, its call center continues to underperform, and the agency is struggling with how to recoup a significant amount of benefit payments that were incorrectly issued. We're also approaching the October 1st deadline that has been set for releasing the new unemployment insurance IT system. Replacing the old mainframe UI system is highly anticipated and carries a lot of promise, but the agency's plan to switch over to the new system in less than 2 weeks also comes with some significant risks that members in the public should be aware of. VEC staff have been advised by counsel not to attend today's meeting due to the pending lawsuit, but I do want to take this time to thank Commissioner Hess, Chief Deputy Commissioner Ryan, and the rest of the VEC staff for their full cooperation and assistance during this review. I'd now like to turn it over to Tracy Smith, who oversaw the study. Tracy?
And as Tracy approaches the podium, members will recall that in July we took up this issue, and because of our own experiences in every legislative office that's represented here, we were acutely aware of the issues. And your request that we have an interim report rather than waiting for December is what we're receiving today, an interim report of how we're progressing along and responding to this really critical need for a lot of people in the Commonwealth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. It is really nice to be able to be with you in person this morning after such a long time apart. I just wanted to remind you all that we will have one more presentation on VEC for you in November. That's going to cover topics that Lauren will not cover for you this morning. Today, she'll be sharing with you her team's findings on the timeliness and accuracy of VEC's processing of unemployment insurance claims, the performance of VEC's call center, the status of VEC's UI modernization project, and VEC's overall management of the agency's response to the pandemic. In November, then, we'll report on staffing and funding of UI operations at the agency, VEC's collection of UI taxes from employers, and how the UI benefits claimants are eligible for compared to certain benchmarks. We can also provide you with updates on the material that we'll share with you this morning. The last thing that I'd like to convey before Lauren begins her presentation is that we are keenly aware that we are presenting findings and recommendations while there is an ongoing lawsuit against the agency. As we always do, we have talked through and verified the material that we're presenting this morning with the VEC staff, including the Commissioner and VEC's leadership, as well as the Secretary. Mr. Chairman, the Secretary is here this morning, and so to the extent that there are questions our staff are unable to answer, just wanted to make you aware that she has graciously given us her time this morning, and we certainly appreciate her being here. With that, Mr. Chairman, we look forward to engaging with you on the Commission and the Commission members this morning on the issue of VEC's performance and ways that it can improve. And unless there are questions for me, I can go ahead and turn the presentation over to Lauren Excel.
Senator Norman.
In my advanced age, the frailty of my recollection is becoming ever apparent. Remind me, where VEC is on the issue of both interest and any other inappropriate payments that were made and whether they're going to be forgiven or recovered.
Very good question. In terms of the interest payments, I believe that the appropriation that was made, Lauren's going to correct me if I'm wrong, by the General Assembly in terms of general funds will cover that interest. And so I don't think that there is. It's forgiven. That's right. The interest has been, there's no interest on the loan. No interest on the loan. We should have waited until Lauren got up here. She is certainly the expert. Senator Norman, in terms of the payments that have been made that should not have been made, we do have further information for you in the presentation on that.
What I might suggest, if I could, is let's do the report in sections as we have and see how much the report addresses those questions. And if you periodically tell us when it's time to ask questions, we'll cover it more efficiently.
Mr. Chairman, I read the report, but I don't know where they're going to put the legal wall up, and that's why I asked her the question as opposed to someone else.
Fine. Thank you, sir. All right, Lauren?
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. My name is Lauren Excel, and I'm the project leader for JLARC's review of the Virginia Employment Commission. I'll be providing you with an interim report on VEC this morning. And as you know, our review is still underway, and we'll be back to share the rest of our findings and the full written report in November. 4 JLARC analysts assisted me with this review, and I'd like to thank them for their efforts. I'd also like to thank the VEC staff for their assistance. Slide 2 just summarizes our full study mandate. I'll primarily be focusing on the first 3 sub-bullets today, though I'll also provide some information on agency staffing and management. Slide 3 is a quick recap of our reporting schedule for this study, which Tracy covered earlier. And as you can see on slide 4, there are a number of topics that I'll cover today. I'll start by explaining the impact COVID had on VEC and its preparedness. It's important to acknowledge the tremendous impact that COVID had on VEC. It significantly increased staff's workload and caused temporary closures of multiple VEC offices. It will come as no surprise that VEC processed substantially more unemployment insurance claims during COVID than ever before. As you likely know by now, unemployment insurance, or UI, provides eligible individuals who become unemployed through no fault of their own with temporary financial support while they search for reemployment. VEC administers Virginia's UI program. Between March 2020 and July 2021, VEC staff issued millions of first UI payments, conducted several 100,000 adjudications, and completed thousands of appeals. This is the first time I've mentioned adjudication, but it will come up several times in my presentation this morning. Adjudication is a step in the UI process where VEC conducts a detailed review of any claims issues identified to determine a claimant's eligibility. A claim can have multiple issues that require adjudication, but not all claims need adjudication. Some claimants waiting on adjudications may receive benefit payments depending on the circumstances of their claim, and that information is in the footnote on slide 6. Through July 2021, VEC paid out nearly $14 billion in state and federal UI benefits. Part of this substantial increase in VEC's workload was due to the addition of several complex federal UI programs. Starting in April 2020, the federal government created 6 new UI programs, each with their own parameters. For example, the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program, or PUA, provided UI benefits to self-employed individuals and independent contractors who were previously ineligible for state UI benefits. VEC was required to administer all of these programs, which meant adding them to their systems and training staff on their requirements. In many cases, federal guidance on how to implement the programs was initially unclear, and it changed multiple times during the pandemic. For example, guidance on how to implement PUA changed 6 times between April 2020 and September 2021. Administering UI caused VEC to experience unprecedented demands on its staff. The number of UI claims staff received went from a low of 136,000 claims in 2019 to 1.4 million claims in 2020. That's a 10-fold increase, and the claims accumulated very quickly beginning in March 2020. To handle the increase, VEC staff overtime hours worked grew exponentially, and VEC hired a net of 473 full-time staff. VEC did request an exemption from state hiring requirements that slowed its recruiting efforts, but their request was not granted. VEC also was not given additional staff from other state agencies or the National Guard, which were helpful resources in other states. These challenges made it difficult for VEC to quickly increase staffing levels to keep pace with UI demands. For the staff VEC was able to hire, the agency needed to obtain more space. VEC opened a new Adjudication Center in June 2020, a new appeals office in September 2020, and a new call center in March 2021 to house VEC staff and third-party contractors. New offices and staff had to be equipped with phones, laptops, and other supplies. This effort took time and was particularly challenging given the scale of VEC's expansion. Finally, unlike previous periods of high unemployment, COVID led to multiple VEC office closures and presented significant risks to staff health. All but 2 of the local career work centers with VEC staff were closed to in-person assistance for most of the pandemic, which required staff to alter the way they interact with their customers. There were also significant detrimental impacts on staff's physical health and mental health, as those required to work in the office risked exposure to COVID, many staff battled infections, and several customers made serious threats against staff safety. Despite the very real challenges presented by COVID, there were several areas where our research indicated VEC could have been better equipped to effectively manage the high number of UI claims received. In particular, VEC had too few staff working in key functions even prior to COVID. Only 55 staff were assigned to adjudicate claims, and only 85 staff were assigned to answer calls at VEC's call centers. This was not enough staff to keep up with VEC's pre-pandemic workload, according to VEC leadership, and it hindered VEC's pre-pandemic adjudication and call center performance. IT is another area where VEC had limited staff. VEC also is not sufficiently equipped to handle high UI claims from an IT and process perspective because the agency was, and currently still is, reliant on an outdated IT system and many paper-based processes. VEC's UI IT system was developed in the 80s and uses a nearly obsolete COBOL programming language. As you can imagine, the system isn't particularly dynamic, making it difficult for VEC to quickly modify UI program requirements. This was a problem prior to COVID, but it became especially evident when VEC had to add the new federal UI programs. Having such an old system made VEC heavily reliant on paper documents and manual processes for UI claims. For example, staff describe having to manually enter data from the UI applications into their system, even when applications were submitted online. These system and process limitations slowed down VEC's UI processing long before COVID, which is why VEC has been working to modernize its UI IT system. VEC's UI process and requirements also inherently are complicated and have been so for a long time. Some of the complexity is driven by federal and state requirements outside of the VEC's control. Nevertheless, prior to COVID and the federal UI programs, individuals claiming UI benefits faced eligibility requirements that are difficult to understand and a very lengthy application process. Similarly, VEC staff have to follow many technical policies and procedures to correctly process UI claims. We also found that VEC has not clearly communicated information to claimants or employers about UI eligibility requirements or how to file a claim. Effective communication is essential to ensuring that eligible individuals can access UI. It also drastically reduces VEC staff's workload by helping to prevent unnecessary calls from customers and inaccuracies on claims. VEC's various UI forms, notices, and other documents are overly complex and confusing. For example, the letter that VEC sends to claimants describing their UI rights and responsibilities is 8 pages long and uses terminology above a college reading level. VEC also does not sufficiently explain key steps in the claims process. For example, VEC has not provided a clear description of what claimants must do to complete identity verification requirements. This has caused confusion according to stakeholders we've spoken with and has led to delays for a number of claims. VEC has taken several steps to improve communications, including texting and robocalling claimants with UI information, as well as having a third-party vendor review sections of its website. However, more needs to be done to sufficiently simplify UI documents and explain the UI process. Improvements would increase eligible claimants' ability to receive benefits, claim timeliness, and avoid errors that create backlogs. Therefore, we recommend VEC revise its UI-related documents to more clearly describe the program, eligibility criteria, and application process. We also recommend VEC develop new tools, such as instructional videos and a UI eligibility wizard to help claimants better understand their potential UI eligibility, the application process, and strategies to avoid application errors. Other states, like New Jersey and Maryland, have developed tools like these and report they've reduced confusion. VEC indicated staff are developing instructional videos and documents to upload to the website, but they have not yet been posted. This is something that needs urgent attention and would go a long way to helping claimants. Therefore, we think VEC should make this a high priority and could start by looking at the tools used by other states.
Lauren, maybe we should ask if at this point are questions or comments.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir, Delegate Rock.
To me, it just begs the question, who writes anything above the college reading level? And how is that determined? I presume it's kind of determined by the fact that nobody can understand it, even though you have a college degree.
It's our understanding that the VEC staff do develop their communications that go out to the public. And we've been told by staff that they are balancing or trying to balance the need to use certain terminology that the federal government recommends. But it still does seem like there's a little bit of leeway to do this in a way that is more understandable to claimants. And that's where some of the other state examples have been really helpful.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman.
Dr. Rock.
I mean, to me, that observation from y'all's study kind of begs, they don't mean for people to be able to understand what they're putting out there. Was that kind of a part of y'all's findings as well, that, you know, they can blame it on the federal government language requirements if they want, but is that just kind of an excuse? And if they don't understand the process, then they're not going to file a proper claim, ergo, they don't have to pay them.
It's certainly hard to speak for staff and their intentions, but our team did not observe that that was the intention, to potentially or deliberately confuse claimants. Instead, it seemed to be more of a conflict with trying to describe things accurately and in detail, and use some of that terminology that does come down from the federal government that's inherently complex. Still, we do think it could be improved.
Other questions? Arnie, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. Now I'll move on to our findings about the timeliness of VEC's first UI payments, adjudications, and appeals. Before I cover the more substantive slides, I do have 3 slides to explain VEC's UI claims process and requirements. Slide 19 summarizes 4 key aspects of VEC's UI claims process. In general, VEC has 21 days to issue first benefit payments after a claim is submitted. Claimants then file claims each week to receive benefits. Claims that need a more detailed review are subject to adjudication, and claims are ultimately approved or denied. Those that are denied can be appealed by claimants or employers. Slide 20 is a graphical representation of the UI process. There's a lot of information to digest here, so I've broken it into a few pieces. The takeaway being that there are multiple steps a claim goes through to be processed. The first part is where claims go through intake, and staff initially determine whether claimants are eligible. When needed, claims go through adjudication for further review, and then some claims are appealed. During COVID, VEC received direction from several external entities about UI claims processing. The governor directed VEC to pay claims that had been delayed and increase the number of weekly adjudications. A class action lawsuit was also filed against VEC, and the settlement required VEC to increase its number of weekly adjudications, adjudicate a backlog of 92,000 claims, and resume payments to claimants whose benefits had been stopped. Now on to our finding about first payment timeliness. Here we found that VEC generally issued first UI payments in a timely manner in previous years, but VEC's first payment timeliness decreased during COVID. As the figure on slide 23 shows, since the pandemic began, VEC has been making fewer first UI payments within 21 days. USDOL generally expects states to make 87% of first UI payments within 21 days. VEC met or nearly met this federal standard prior to COVID, but performance began to decrease in the second quarter of 2020 as UI backlogs began to accumulate. As of July 2021, VEC was only processing 26% of first payments within 21 days. Nearly half of claimants were waiting more than 70 days for payment. Regarding adjudication timeliness, we found that VEC has not effectively responded to the increased volume of adjudications during COVID. As a result, VEC's backlog of adjudications remains substantial and will likely grow. Here's a figure showing that, in almost all cases, VEC's adjudications are not timely. The bars show VEC's adjudication workload, and the line shows the percent of adjudications that VEC completed in 21 days. USDOL expects states to complete 80% of adjudications within 21 days. VEC has historically struggled to meet this federal standard, and performance further decreased in 2020 during COVID. As of June 2021, VEC was completing only 2% of adjudications within 21 days. 82% of the claimants were waiting more than 70 days on adjudication. VEC has recently made progress in adjudicating claims, completing most all of the 92,000 claims tied to the federal class action lawsuit in August 2021. The agency's progress is reflected in the increased number of adjudication staff now complete each week, which was up to over 20,000 per week as of July, and has increased even more since then. However, VEC still has work to do on adjudications. The lawsuit against VEC is ongoing, and an August court order directed VEC to work with legal advocacy groups on a status report on any remaining claims issues. In addition, VEC still has a substantial backlog of UI claims requiring adjudication. As of August 2021, over 100,000 claims that were not part of the lawsuit were still in VEC's adjudication queue. Staff estimate an additional 1 million claims issues could also require adjudication. These are things that VEC initially bypassed during the height of COVID and now has to review them to see whether adjudication is needed. The federal government is requiring VEC to review these issues, though VEC leadership raised concern about its ability to do so and hopes to be granted some relief. The number of remaining claims and issues to adjudicate is important because it will cause further delays and backlogs in adjudication, and claimants found ineligible for benefits will have to repay the benefits they've already received. One of the key root causes of VEC's challenges with adjudications is the agency has not been able to hire enough adjudication staff. As of mid-July, nearly half of VEC's full-time adjudication positions were vacant, and there's been high turnover among existing and newly hired staff. VEC has taken steps to streamline its internal recruiting process and eventually hired contractors, but these actions were not enough to avoid adjudication delays or backlogs. This line graph shows the timeline for VEC's hiring of adjudication staff, which has been slow. VEC began to hire new agency staff for adjudications in 2020, but hiring increased relatively slowly through 2021. And you can see that by the lighter blue line on the graphic. VEC really didn't begin hiring contractors to assist with adjudication until late spring of 2021. This is because VEC's initial strategy was to focus on hiring agency staff, according to leadership. As of August 2021, VEC is up to 137 VEC staff and 206 contractors conducting adjudications. Given the volume of adjudications VEC still has to complete and the staffing challenges it still faces, we have a recommendation for VEC to develop a plan describing actions and a timeline for resolving outstanding adjudications and previously bypassed issues on claims. This plan should include the adjudication staff needed for this effort and VEC's hiring strategy. The plan and updates should be submitted to the legislature and governor and published on VEC's website. Mr. Chairman, as you'll see, several of our recommendations would have VEC provide status updates or plans to the legislature and the governor. Given the magnitude of the challenges that need to be addressed by VEC, we believe this additional accountability is necessary to ensure the agency takes effective and expedient actions. Next, we found that VEC's first-level appeals are taking longer to complete, partly due to inefficient case workflow. For context, VEC has a two-tiered appeal system. First-level appeals are the first tier, where a claimant or employer can dispute VEC's decision to approve or deny UI benefits. The second tier is called a commission-level appeal, and it provides the claimant or employer an opportunity to appeal VEC's first-level decision. Efforts to appeal cases beyond the commission level must be pursued in court. As the figure on slide 32 shows, VEC's first level appeals were timely prior to COVID, but are now taking a long time to complete. USDOL generally expects states to complete first level appeals in 30 days. As of July 2021, VEC's first level appeals were taking 275 days on average. About a third of these appeals are more than 360 days old, and staff anticipate timeliness challenges will grow as more claims go through the UI process and are appealed. As of August 2021, VEC had a backlog of 62,000 first-level appeals still waiting to be processed. One thing contributing to appeal delays is some claimants' cases aren't necessarily appealed. Claimants who disagree with their benefit amount can appeal VEC's determination, and VEC's policies currently require appeal staff to review these cases before they can be sent to VEC's monetary unit. If VEC clarified for claimants they should request a monetary redetermination rather than submit a formal appeal, VEC's appeals workload could be reduced by 30 to 40% according to staff. We have several recommendations on slide 34 that would help accomplish this. The first recommends VEC identify exactly how many cases are currently awaiting an appeal decision that could be sent to VEC's monetary unit. The second and third recommendations would have VEC modify its internal policies and the notice sent to claimants to support this preferred workflow.
Lauren,
Mr.
then you want to take questions at this point for that
Yes.
section? So what we're doing, the whole report's in like 5 sections, and as we go through each section to make the conversation more understandable, we just tarry for a moment. Are there any questions on the section related to timeliness of first payments, adjudication, and appeals?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Dr. Rock.
If I may, slide 25, where it speaks to the adjudication timeliness. Did y'all see any evidence, and if not, is this something y'all can maybe look into for your November report? I mean, if you look at in 2017, it looks like there was a change in priority from the agency as claimant numbers were reducing, timeliness was also reducing. So it seems like there was an attitude within VEC that they didn't need to comply with the timeliness standards. It wasn't a high priority. Did y'all see anything suggesting that? I mean, obviously, when the pandemic hit, we knew it was going to be a problem. But even prior to that, as numbers were decreasing, their ability to meet the timeline was also decreasing. If y'all could look into why that was there, it sounds like it was a philosophy within the agency.
The best explanation we've heard from staff about why some of the timeliness in different areas was decreasing even prior to COVID was that they had to reduce staffing levels. And when we asked the agency why that was the case, it gets back to their funding model. When unemployment goes down and the case workload goes down, they really decrease the number of staff due to limited funding. We're still in the process of looking at that funding model and hope to come back with more clarity on that in November about the extent to which that really does force some of the staffing positions to go away. But that seems to be the main driver for some of these timeliness and quality decreases.
Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm not sure, thank you, Lauren, I appreciate this. I'm not sure if this question really is appropriately for you or for the Secretary of Labor, and I'm not sure if she's going to speak now or later, whatever the agenda is. But I know that more recently, there's been a lot of efforts made towards improving the adjudication process, and I'm just wondering what has transpired, how has that played out? And obviously, there were decisions made and improvements made, and I'd just love to know where we are with that. So again, I'm not sure if that's for you or for the Secretary, Lauren.
I could speak to that a little bit. In terms of staffing, the biggest improvement we've seen is the addition of those contractors. So that did take a long time for VEC to bring in the contractors, but now that they are on board, that seems to really be helping them increase the number of adjudications they can handle each week. We mentioned in one of the slides that they were up to 20,000 adjudications per week, which is significantly higher than it had been. And I believe that number has gone up even further since. Anecdotally, we've been told about 40,000 adjudications per week. So staffing is certainly key in that. We've also understood that they've just shifted priority internally to really focus on those adjudications, which is actually why we've seen some of the first payment timeliness go down in recent months because of that shift. So it seems to be an all-hands-on-deck kind of effort.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Lauren, go ahead and we will.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir. Dr. Cox.
Yeah, Lauren, it really does seem like, though, except for the lawsuit and those adjudications, that's about the only thing they seem to have dealt with. It almost seems like they've gotten worse on everything else, number one. And number two, tell us about the other states. I mean, they're so much better than we are. And both the Appropriations Committee, the Assembly has put a lot of effort into this, and the graphs just keep going the wrong way. I mean, talk a little bit maybe about some of the best practices of other states if you know about them. What are they doing so much better than we're doing and continue to do better than we're doing?
We did look into other states and certainly found that some were able to stay on top of their adjudication workload better than VEC, though definitely would like to acknowledge that states did struggle really nationwide with adjudications. Some things that they have, we spoke with a state, Utah, that's known as a leader in this area. They have an excellent modernized UI IT system that really helped them work through their adjudications and other areas of their workflows much quicker because staff were not having to reach out and do as many manual contacts with claimants. Claimants could go and see the status of their claims, so they weren't overwhelming call centers. And everything was just more automated through the system. That seems to be something that other states also found helpful. We also noted a few states that had early on prioritized how they were going to triage the adjudication workload. So North Carolina stood out as a state that very quickly settled in on a strategy of putting the most difficult adjudications, claims issues, towards the most experienced staff. That's something that VEC is doing now, but early in the pandemic, it seemed to lack a clear strategy for how exactly to triage and allocate the different adjudication claims issues across its staff. And in response to the first part of your question, we have seen that just working on adjudications has resulted in other areas not potentially getting the amount of attention that we would like to see. That first payment timeliness is one of those areas that the staff seem to be taken away from that to focus more on adjudication, so we did see that decline. We also have seen some lack of a prioritization on reviewing employer separation reports, which I'll get into. It's a particular report that staff have to review at the beginning of the process.
Okay, maybe the thing to do now is to move on to the next block. And incidentally, when your report is finished, we will ask the secretary to come forward, and she may also want to respond to some of these questions. So go ahead.
Okay. And on slide 35, now I'll share our findings on the accuracy of VEC's UI claims processing. One thing that plays an important role in the accuracy of UI claims is VEC's review of the employer separation reports. These are documents employers complete describing the details of claimant separation from employment. They help identify when claimants do not meet UI eligibility requirements. We found that to expedite payments to claimants, VEC approved claims before reviewing employer separation reports. This reduced claimants' wait time, but it also decreased claim accuracy and resulted in overpayments. VEC typically reviews employer separation reports to verify claimants' UI eligibility. These reports are key to determining why claimants left their job. It's time-consuming to deal with an employer separation report because VEC relies on employers to complete them and send them back through the mail. Then, after they're received, VEC staff have to manually review them. VEC must strike a balance. They need to review separation reports to check claimant eligibility, but they are also required by USDOL to issue first payments in 21 days. As of August 2021, VEC had not reviewed employer separation reports for approximately 579,000 claims. When reports are finally reviewed, issues may be identified, which will add to VEC's adjudication backlog. Some claimants currently receiving benefits may have their benefits stopped, and some claimants will be found ineligible and will have to repay VEC for benefits received. VEC has been relatively understaffed in reviewing separation reports throughout the pandemic, but began using contractors to assist with these important reviews in June 2021. As of August 2021, VEC had 0 agency staff and 35 contractors reviewing separation reports. We also found that VEC's incorrect benefit payments, including to fraudulent actors, increased substantially during COVID. Incorrect payments can be caused by mistakes made by claimants, employers, or VEC staff. They can also be caused by fraud, but the majority are not. Incorrect payments are most always overpayments. Slide 40 shows the increase in VEC's incorrect payment rate in 2020. USDOL expects states to limit incorrect payments to 10% or less. VEC has historically been slightly above this standard, but its incorrect payment rate increased significantly during COVID. In 2020, VEC's rate was up to nearly 45%. All states have struggled with increases in incorrect payments during COVID because of confusion with the new UI programs and the growing sophistication of fraudulent actors. This increase in VEC's incorrect payment rate is still noteworthy, though, because incorrect payments for state UI negatively impact the state's UI trust fund, which is used to pay benefits. VEC is estimated to have issued $930 million in incorrect payments in 2020 for the state UI program. This estimate does not include overpayments for federal programs, which are likely substantial but do not negatively affect the state's UI trust fund. We are citing an estimate here because VEC is still working to confirm the total amount of incorrect payments. This estimate is published by USDOL and is based on the amount of incorrect payments identified in a random sample of claims. Fraud is only a portion of the estimated $930 million. DOL estimates indicate fraudulent payments for state UI increased to 7.5% and totaled $70 million in 2020. Again, we're citing an estimate here because VEC is currently working to confirm the total amount of fraudulent claims. Staff still have a backlog of approximately 136,000 claims to review. There are a lot of reasons why fraud increased during COVID, many of which are outside of VEC's control. However, we reviewed the checks VEC has in place to detect and prevent fraud. I won't go into too much detail here, but you can look at VEC's implementation of the various required and recommended fraud checks on slide 42. The bottom line is that VEC complied with required fraud checks prior to COVID, and at the bottom of the table, you can see that VEC did not implement some key checks until the fall of 2020 or later. That means that some fraud was not caught early in the pandemic. VEC has since gone back and flagged potentially fraudulent claims to review and is now implementing all required and recommended fraud checks. Importantly, incorrect payments, including those due to fraud, will be difficult for VEC to collect. This will negatively impact the state's UI trust fund. VEC is federally required to try to recover UI overpayments and has internal staff and external partners who work on collections. Overpayments became increasingly difficult to collect as more time passes, especially for fraud, which makes early detection essential. VEC has currently paused all collections efforts and is determining the best way to pursue collections. Some claimants will find it difficult to repay benefits mistakenly received, and some may pursue waivers through the state's new overpayment waiver process. Mr. Chairman, I'll pause here for questions.
Questions then on the accuracy of the claim processing?
Mr. Chairman.
Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could you explain a little bit more what exactly incorrect payments are and what the VC is currently doing to ensure proper payments? That would be helpful.
Yes, Absolutely. So incorrect payments are any payment where the claimant has been found ineligible or mistakenly received an amount that they were not eligible to receive. My team might have a more technical definition, but I think that about sums it up. Fraud is just a portion of those incorrect payments and really comes down to the intent. And in terms of what VEC staff are doing to make sure that payments are correct, it really gets back to the process. So things like reviewing those employer separation reports early on and determining whether individuals truly are eligible to receive these payments, that directly impacts the incorrect payment rate that they see. Also catching fraud early on with those fraud checks. That's very, very important to making sure that staff aren't incorrectly paying individuals who aren't eligible.
Thank you, Ms. Chairman. I wanted to make sure I understood your statement correctly. One, it's a given the longer they wait before they pursue collecting an overpayment, the more difficult it becomes. But did I hear you correctly? But they have implemented a policy at present, they're not pursuing any overpayments.
That's correct.
I.e., every day they continue in that policy, the more difficult to collect those overpayments will become.
That's correct. It's our understanding that they've paused all collections efforts right now. We asked staff and leadership why that's the case, and we're told that the backlogs they're currently facing do make it difficult to go after collections. For example, until a case is appealed, if it's going to be appealed, you don't want to try and collect the money and then have the appeal reverse something. So that's one piece. Individuals are also able to pursue overpayment waivers now. So it sounds like VEC staff are largely waiting to see if some of those are going to be pursued. But across the board, it sounds like all collections efforts have been stopped.
And if may, and thank you for your broad explanation. It saved me at least one further question as to the why. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When was this policy, when they paused it? I mean, I guess that was just an agency call with approval from the Secretary's office, and it will be in effect until they determine we're going to go forward?
It may be appropriate to hold a question like that until we speak with the Secretary.
Thank you.
Senator Norman.
Can you remind me what the approximate number was that residents of the Department of Corrections defrauded VEC on claims? And second part of the question is, I realize that either we have to rely upon the AG or the Commonwealth Attorney's Office, but are they making any prosecutorial efforts against those individuals in DOC?
To the first part of your question, my team will correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe there was about, with that inmate, the inmate issue of fraud, I believe it was about $40 million for the state UI program and confirmed fraudulent claims. And then, yes, your understanding is correct that it's up to the AG's office and the local Commonwealth's attorney to decide whether to prosecute. Our understanding is that VEC staff really don't play any sort of role in that other than helping to provide information when needed. We don't, unfortunately, have numbers on how many of those cases are ultimately prosecuted, but we understand that there are a number of cases that are being worked behind the scenes.
Senator Norman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I understand what you're saying, but while the Commonwealth of Virginia is ultimately the victim, VEC is the agency that is on the front line of being aggrieved by these fraudulent payments. So I'm not totally satisfied with your answer, but I realize you're just repeating that which you're told. The second thing that occurs to me, knowing a little bit about this area of the law, while I can appreciate that pursuing some fraudulent claims may be challenging, as to establishing the identity and the whereabouts of the individual, I'm not sure that that challenge is quite so paramount with somebody who's in the Department of Corrections.
Thank you, Senator Norman. Other discussion? Otherwise, we'll move along to the call centers.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to correct one number just for the sake of public and media being here. The $40 million in fraudulent payments for the corrections issue, that includes both state and federal. And the team believes that is mostly federal. We also know that VEC is working with federal agents on these cases as well. So just to make sure that, I think Lauren had said that the 40 million was mostly state, but just wanted it to be clear that it actually is mostly federal funds.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. Okay. And starting on slide 45, I'll cover our findings related to call center performance. As many of you have been told by your constituents, VEC's call centers have been answering only a small portion of calls. We found this is largely because VEC has lacked sufficient IT systems and has had too few call center staff. When we looked at VEC's call center data, it was clear that most calls have not been answered, and customers who do get through experience long call wait times. Slide 46 shows various call center metrics and how performance has changed over time. As of June 2021, VEC was answering about 4% of all calls received, about 490,000 calls were being blocked, and the average time customers waited to receive a callback was 10 hours. This means that many claimants could not get in touch with VEC to ask questions about their claim or provide information needed to move their claim forward. Call centers were the only way for claimants to contact VEC for most of the pandemic because local offices were not providing in-person assistance with UI claims. Insufficient IT systems played a key role in VEC's call center challenges. VEC has lacked important software that's needed to monitor call center performance and strategically allocate staff. VEC's UI IT system has also presented challenges. Call center staff have difficulty learning how to use the system because of its outdated interface. Several other limitations are at least partially system-driven, including that staff cannot fully process PIN resets through the system, and some staff are unable to resolve claims issues or see details for existing claims. VEC took some early actions to improve call center operations, but the most effective actions were just taken recently. I've already covered some of these actions in previous slides, but it's worth highlighting that VEC hired Deloitte in August 2021 to help manage its call center operations. This partnership will provide several hundred more call center staff. VEC leadership report an improvement in call center performance since Deloitte began, but we haven't yet finished analyzing the data. A few things have hindered Deloitte from implementing improvements as quickly as planned, including VEC's procurement of quality monitoring and workforce management software. VEC has been working with VITA on this for several months, but has experienced delays. These systems are projected to be in place this coming October. We plan to provide another update on call center performance during our briefing in November. Slide 49 shows VEC's timeline for increasing the number of staff answering calls during COVID. The takeaway here is that the number of agency staff answering calls did not increase much from pre-COVID levels, even when call volume spiked in the spring of 2021. Agency staff handle calls relating to existing state UI claims. VEC had numerous contractor staff handling federal claims, and the number of those contractors did increase in 2020, but VEC began reducing those contractors in 2021. As of June 2021, VEC had 88 agency staff answering calls for existing state UI claims and 300 contractors answering calls for federal claims. The addition of Deloitte staff will show up in the August staffing data. Slide 50 just provides a recap of recent VEC actions that are expected to help reduce call volume and improve call center operations. I'll click through them for the sake of time. And I'll wrap up the call center section with this recommendation. Given the significant customer frustration with VEC's call centers and the level of underperformance, we have a recommendation that VEC update the legislature and governor on call center performance for the next several quarters and publish the information on its website.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of questions. The first one, calling staff. So have they increased the number of staff persons to receive these calls?
The VEC staff or the
Yes, ma'am.
contractor staff? Yes, they have increased both, but the increase in the VEC agency staff is pretty minimal. And that's the lower line on slide 49. You really see that kind of decrease even at times during COVID, and right now it's only slightly higher than pre-COVID.
Mr. Chairman, second question that when a constituent call the first number, and the first number say call this number, the problem you're having is that when they call the number that you tell them to call, they're having a hard time with the first number. Then when they get that number, they say call this number. And that's the problem, the number that they get to call, there has not been a decrease in someone calling back after they call the second number. That's the problem they're having, you see, because when I finally get through that first call, you say, hey, call this number. And I call that number. There's a problem still. When I call that number, no one is not calling them back. So you're saying to me, so I just want to know, what would I tell them? The answer you gave is, my own words, is a political answer. That's something that my friend Senator Norman would tell me. See, but I want to know, so what do I tell them? You call that number, and I can guarantee you that there's someone will call you back within an hour, within 2 hours. That's the problem we're having now.
It's our understanding there are a number of different lines that claimants can now call to get through to the VEC. The graphic that we have on slide 49 shows just in total the number of staff allocated, but I'm not quite sure we have the breakdown for the specific lines of how many staff would be answering those phones. In general, if staff were to call just the basic VEC call center line, that's where our understanding is that the percentage of calls answered has been pretty low.
Mr. Chairman, last question. Then how much training do you need to answer a phone? You said training.
Yes, sir, that's a good...
Even I can do that, answer a phone. So how much training do you need from June to now to October? How much training do you need to somebody answer the phone? They say, yo, be cool, I'm going to take care of you. How much training do you need to do that?
That's a good question, Senator. We asked quite a bit what the training entails for the various positions at VEC. And the call center training, it's our understanding that that can be complicated right now because of having to learn how to use their existing system. So the IT system, with it being so outdated and having an interface that requires programming that people don't know, that seems to really take some time to get individuals up to speed on how to work that system, as well as just learning about the UI process in general. The VEC staff who answer calls mainly are responding to questions about existing state UI claims, so they have to be able to tell people about the process and where someone's claim is in the process.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Lauren, I would ask you to go ahead and do the last two sections if you would, and then we'll take further questions. Just do your last two sections.
Okay. And now on slide 53, I'll spend a few minutes discussing VEC's UI IT modernization project. As many of you are aware, VEC is in the process of modernizing its UI IT system. This project was designed to have 3 phases. Upgrading VEC's UI imaging system is the first, the UI tax system was the second, and the UI benefit system is the third. VEC hired a third-party contractor to complete this project. It began 12 years ago and still remains incomplete 8 years after the original expected completion date of May 2013. All things considered, VEC's UI modernization project has taken much too long to complete. UI modernization projects are relatively complex, and other states have faced challenges in completing them. Still, these projects should be completed in 3 to 5 years, according to subject matter experts. Several other states have shown this is possible. VEC's project delays have largely been caused by insufficient staff and project management, technical challenges, including converting data from the old system to the new one, and VEC's decision to pause the project to address UI claims during COVID. The timeline on slide 55 shows the various phases and milestones of VEC's project. 2 key upcoming dates are October 1st, 2021, when VEC plans to launch its new UI benefits system, and June 2022, when VEC plans to finish the project. VEC's UI modernization project is important because the current system is a large contributing factor to VEC's poor COVID response. The system has made customers' experiences with VEC poor, and it has made it difficult for VEC to train and retain new staff. The good news is VEC's new UI benefit system is expected to improve the claims process over the long term. However, several unmitigated risks could limit the success of VEC's planned launch of the new system on October 1st, as well as the new system's functionality in the future. The table on slide 58 lists functions that subject matter experts recommend modern UI systems have. As you can see in the 2 columns on the right, VEC's new system will have most all of the recommended functions, and the vast majority are supposed to be ready by October 1st. For example, there will be a customer portal where claimants can see the status of their claim, which will help decrease the number of customer calls going to VEC. One key function that will not be included is automatic text and email notifications alerting claimants about their claim status or the need to submit documents. Claimants will have to proactively log in to check for these notifications, which may cause delays in claims processing. Several major project risks have not been fully mitigated and continue to threaten VEC's UI modernization project, even though the new system launch is fast approaching. One of the most important risks is the incomplete or inaccurate conversion of UI data. VEC has made numerous data conversion attempts and is still working to get an acceptable level of accuracy. Issues with data conversion could ultimately cause errors in VEC's records for previous and in progress claims. Another risk I'd like to highlight is that the system stays down for more than the planned 5 to 7 days. This would hinder claimants' ability to file claims and VEC staff's ability to process them. And finally, another major risk is that VEC does not finish training staff to use the new system by the time it goes live in October. Staff training just began on September 13th, and VEC is still finalizing a plan to ensure all staff receive the guidance needed to successfully process claims. VEC is aware of these project risks, and VEC and VITA, which provides formal oversight for the project, have recently increased their efforts to monitor the project status and risks. At this point, both VEC and VITA remain optimistic the new system will successfully go live on October 1st. We'll follow the launch closely, and we'll report back on how it went during our November briefing. Another finding related to VEC's UI modernization project is that VEC has not yet conducted sufficient usability testing with customers. Usability testing with customers is key to the long-term success of the new UI benefit system, and subject matter experts recommend that states conduct extensive usability testing with agency staff and customers. To date, VEC has tested its new system with a variety of agency staff, including those unfamiliar with UI, but no testing has been completed with true end users, such as the employers or claimants. Customer usability testing would help VEC identify areas of confusion within the system and possible improvements before their modernization project ends next year. Therefore, we recommend that VEC regularly collect feedback on the usability of the new UI benefits system from claimants and employers and make regular improvements. User feedback and VEC's plans to improve the system should be shared with the legislature and governor and posted on VEC's website. My last finding on VEC's UI modernization is related to the employer tax system that was modernized in 2015. We found significant problems with this system that have not yet been resolved. The existence of these problems and the fact they have not been fixed over the past 6 years raises concern that similar challenges may exist with the new UI benefits system. Over 55 problems currently remain unresolved in VEC's UI tax system. This is a relatively small portion of the nearly 600 problems initially identified for the system, but many of the remaining problems are important. Some cause process inefficiencies and negatively impact tax collections. For example, the system is supposed to automatically assign a delinquency tax rate to employers that haven't paid their state UI taxes, but it doesn't do so accurately. VEC staff have to manually review each employer that's assigned a delinquency rate to determine whether the rate is correct. To ensure these problems get fixed before VEC's UI modernization project ends next year, we have a recommendation that VEC work with its vendor to develop a plan describing steps and a timeline for addressing all existing tax system problems. The plan should include a detail on how each problem will be fixed, deadlines for fixes, and any additional resources needed. Mr. Chairman, I'll pause here for questions or keep going.
Keep going, if you would.
Now I'll move on to the last section of my presentation about VEC's management of the COVID-19 response. The first finding here is that VEC's communications to customers and internal communications to staff have been infrequent and incomplete during COVID. This has caused significant frustration, confusion, and mistakes among both VEC staff and its customers. VEC did not communicate clearly with its many customers and stakeholders during COVID, failing to proactively notify customers and stakeholders of key program and process changes. For example, denial letters sent to claimants eligible for the federal PUA program did not clearly state that claimants actually needed to be denied for state UI benefits before they could apply for PUA. Instead, claimants may have thought they were simply ineligible for PUA benefits. As I mentioned earlier, VEC did make an effort to provide customers with UI information through text campaigns and robocalls, but these efforts were not enough to overcome claimant confusion and frustration. VEC's lack of clear communication resulted in increased calls to VEC and legislators and prevented eligible individuals from accessing UI benefits. Regarding internal communications, VEC leadership holds regular meetings, but does not effectively convey essential information to all key staff. For example, we were told by one staff member, claimants in the news media hear about problems and updates before it was announced to the local offices. Another staff member told us, there needs to be a more coordinated effort at VEC as far as communication. Everything has gotten so disorganized with the influx of claims, we need to have a communication strategy. Insufficient internal communications made it difficult for staff to respond to questions and process claims effectively. Therefore, we have a recommendation for VEC's commissioner to ensure that all key developments are communicated clearly and expeditiously to all VEC staff, especially those in leadership or positions communicating with the public. My last finding this morning is related to oversight and accountability. As noted in my previous slides, VEC has underperformed in several key areas, including UI timeliness, UI accuracy, call center responsiveness, UI modernization, and communications. This underperformance was substantial during COVID, but it also existed in many areas prior to COVID. This highlights the need for additional agency oversight and accountability. Currently, VEC is primarily overseen by USDOL and Virginia's executive branch. USDOL regularly collects data on VEC performance, but it doesn't collect information on important aspects of agency operations. DOL also does not issue substantive penalties, such as financial penalties, when VEC performs poorly, Instead, DOL typically requires VEC to complete corrective action plans. Virginia's Secretary of Labor is responsible for overseeing VEC at the state level. Still, additional state oversight is needed for an agency of VEC size and critical mission. Other states seem to monitor UI in a variety of ways. We have a few examples on slide 74 of states that use legislative committees, advisory committees, or a board for this purpose. We are considering how additional state oversight could be structured in Virginia, and we'll come back with a recommendation or some policy options during our briefing in November. And also in November, we'll share our findings on several new topics, including VEC's funding and emergency planning, UI trust fund solvency, employer tax rates and process, and UI benefit levels. We'll update you on a few things that I covered today as well, including VEC's launch of the new UI benefits system and call center performance. And finally, we hope to have VEC provide you with a status report on actions they've taken to implement our recommendations.
Hey, Lauren, thank you very much for your report. This is a little different than we usually do reports. We usually have a final report of recommendations, but because of the changing nature of the conditions, we thought an interim report might be essential, and the goal of this would be to try to bring about an improvement as we can so that as much as possible, the final report would also be a report of the progress that's been made. But in terms of our timeline, I think the thing we want to do now is turn to Secretary Healy. And Madam Secretary, do you have items that you would want to address by way of our questions or presentation? I invite you to come to the podium.
Thank you, Chair, members of the committee, Megan Healy, Secretary of Labor. I'm going to do a little bit quick presentation. I'm going to try to answer some of the questions that you asked, and then I'll entertain some additional questions. I want to first thank JLARC for this report. The unemployment insurance system is very complex, as you've learned today and have known. Adding extra federal benefits during this pandemic has even made it more of a challenge. So you think about during the Great Recession, about 40% of individuals in Virginia actually qualified or were eligible for unemployment insurance. Now what we did is with these federal programs, the PUA program, which was described as the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program, not only added extended eligibility to our gig workers, independent contractors, these are individuals we did not have information on. We collect payroll at a quarterly basis on all Virginians who pay into our system. So we had this large group of individuals we had no information on. Did they have a job? What kind of work did they did? You know, they had to submit tax records, but later on, unemployment. We also, part of the PUA program, I just want to highlight, was that if somebody was out of work or had to quit their job or left work, they're on the regular unemployment insurance benefit because of childcare, because of illness, because they had COVID. They also moved to a federal program, but the way that is designed is that they actually had to claim, they had to actually file for benefits under regular unemployment insurance. We had to adjudicate those claims and then move them to additional federal. And so that also caused a bottleneck within our adjudication. So when we talk about adjudications, it's not just the easy way, someone eligible or not. Somebody could not be found ineligible because they quit their job, but it was really because of a pandemic situation, and then you had to go through all that documentation to figure that out, to move that to the federal PUA as well. I also want to thank the VEC. They've done amazing work. I'm glad that you, JLARC, discussed about some of the mental health and what they've gone through. You saw the overtime hours, the staffing shortages. It's pretty amazing. These are my heroes. These are essential workers during this pandemic that had to show up in the office. We had 13 COVID outbreaks, 2 COVID deaths. We had to bring in individuals from retirement to work on our IT system. These are individuals in their 70s, and you know they were risking their lives in environment with COVID. We got over 12 million pieces of mail that have to be manually processed. And those are individuals that are opening the mail and uploading documents, as well as the security of our system. It's pretty amazing that we distributed $14 billion to Virginia's economy. What does this look like? That is food on families' tables. That's paying the rent bill, keeping the lights on. And that's what the unemployment system did this past year. A couple of things I know that JLARC will be mentioning in November is around funding. I think that's one of the biggest things that we need to evaluate and look at. This is a non-general fund agency. It always has been until this past year. The General Assembly has given additional funds through state allocations, general funds, as well as a great thank you so much for the ARPA funds. But this system is pretty much that individuals, our Virginians, pay taxes to the federal government, and there's a resource justification model that says how much money that we send to the federal government actually comes back to Virginia. An example, we actually only get 39%. We're the 51st state in the country of the percentage of money we get back. An example, so that's about a tune of $32.6 million is what sets our administrative budget per year, because those are federal funds. An example, Maryland, who has around 6 million, a little bit north of 6 million individuals, they receive 61% of their funds that they send to the federal government, and they send it back to Maryland. And their annual budget is about $44 million. So a lot more than our Virginia budget. Our economy has done great, and so the VEC over these past years has laid off staff, sold buildings, sold cars, sold offices around the state, and continue to cut. And that's really because our economy's been great over these last couple years. But what that really did is I totally agree that the VEC was not prepared for this pandemic. Usually when you see recessions, it looks a lot different. There's a little bit of a note. I get warn letters. They come to my office about large layoffs. When we have large layoffs, the VEC can actually go into that business and automatically enroll individuals in unemployment. They do not have to go through this process. We also see hints during the recession, we could open our offices. We had lines at our VEC offices, which we have a little bit over 30, that can help one-on-one, face-to-face with claimants. We did not have that option. We had to really rely on our call center, which was in Grundy, and we actually moved it to Van Sant in Southwest Virginia to do a lot of this work as well. A couple things, and so staffing has been a challenge this whole period. It is a pandemic. People are scared to come to work. We did have remote options, but not many. Many had to come to our headquarters and our call centers. Before the pandemic, the VEC was not allowed to hire third-party contractors. It was all merit staff, and so we had to hire our own. Thankfully that we have engaged contractors, if it's through call center work, for back office support and processing as well through that. But I will also say with our staffing, there has been challenges. There was an example of asking for state employees. We did twice put out the call for state employees on a voluntary basis to come work at the VEC, and we had no one. We also reached out to certain agency heads about would you be willing to share employees, and we, by talking to DHRM, you cannot ask somebody to come work at a different agency. They have to voluntarily move, and so that was a challenge, even though we looked at bonuses. The National Guard was some other states did. Most of the National Guard, as you know, has been working on the vaccination and contact tracing, as well as the testing sites. They are reimbursable through FEMA and other federal funds. We did not have those funds, and so we would have had to pay for the National Guard to come to the VEC, so we chose to use our funding for staffing companies instead of leveraging the National Guard. I also want to mention around funding during this pandemic that the VEC did not receive the tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars that other agencies did. It was, again, we used some of the funding, we had it increase in allocation, but to really ramp up our staff or support our UI technology system, that we did not receive those funds until General Assembly gave us the $15 million. That was $10 million to continue to increase in our contact center, our call center, and that $5 million was for the UI technology upgrade. And that's really to build that bridge between all these new federal programs and how do we move those documents and data into our new UI system as well. During the ARPA funds, which was a great investment in the VEC, this ship has turned around, and we are looking forward to the future of what those ARPA funds really are going to help support the agency. The Deloitte contract has been great. So we did have a call center contract. We know that many individuals were not getting through the phones through our call center in Van Sant, as well as our other call centers. We have hired Deloitte, which is kind of I would say a tier 2 call center. Our idea and pilot is to look at navigators, because some of these issues are very complex, and every individual that calls our call center has their own story to tell and their own complications with our UI. And so we are hiring a higher level of call center With our UI technology, it's also going to help support so that call center staff can look into not one computer system and figure out what the challenges are with that claimant. Currently, we have 5 different systems that don't talk to each other. So if an individual's in the appeals process or adjudication process and they call their call center, they might not get the information that they're really looking for as well. Improper payments, I just kind of want to review what we call them improper payments. This is called incorrect payments, what that is and what that looks like, as well as I do have an updated number over about the 2 million individuals that have filed. So first, that updated number, the first one was off of our BAM report. That's the federal DOL. That's the benefits accuracy measurement. And so that number as a sample size of a little less than 400 that was taken to see how many improper payments were. So the VEC has run to look at improper payments, and it's 86.7 million. It's a little different than the 930 million that's in the slides. Again, that's an estimate based off of a small sample size. So I hope we're going to continue to work with JLARC on looking at larger sample size, like looking at the whole population as a whole and making sure they have access to the numbers as well. And so that's basis improper payments. An improper payment can be multiple things. Most of these are not fraudulent payments. It could be anything from a weekly monetary benefit that somebody was supposed to get $377 and we gave him $378, okay? So that could be like a $1 difference in a payment, and that would go into the improper payment. It also is because the complexity of our different systems, so our regular unemployment insurance system, again, we could have given out money for the regular UI and then realized they qualified for the PUA program, so that federal program, so we had to move them off of regular UI and move them to the PUA, and that's also another example of an improper payment, that they are getting money out of one part of the UI system and not the federal PUA system. So I just want to move that. There has been some fraudulent activity. I'm not going to deny that. The example with Department of Corrections, we are working very closely on with Colonel Settle and Department of Corrections and Secretary Moran. We've had multiple calls around this. Some of these individuals who have been on the outside to support some of the individuals in corrections they've been prosecuted, and we continue to work hard. That again, the federal government is engaged and involved in that, and to decrease fraud payments as well. And so really, what's next? You know, we see these findings. We agree it's been an extreme challenge. You know, our ultimate goal is to make sure that individuals that are eligible for benefits will get benefits in a timely manner, and that is our ultimate goal today and for the rest. And so really, how do we build a robust system? And in Virginia, we always like to be best in nation of what that looks like. I think our first step is October 1, when we have our UI modernization technology up and running. I've previewed it. I welcome anyone who's interested in previewing this technology. It looks great. And so even though there is a question about a blackout, our number one priority is that week when that goes live is people will be able to claim for benefits as well as they will receive benefits. That is our ultimate goal. We've seen a decline, obviously, in individuals in unemployment. Anyone that left the federal the unemployment system, there's a period that they're going to stay out, so they can't come back, 30 days. So this is the perfect time to have the system up and running. This is the lowest level of stress that we've had on the system in a while to really get to launch a system. And so I'm very excited about this. It's going to be better to communicate with our claimants. It's going to show documents that are set in the mail. So if individuals did not get in the mail, you can actually go into your portal and see those documents. It's going to help with the adjudication process. One of the issues is when an adjudication officer goes through that process, there's 5 technology solutions that they have to look into. Plus, they have to do, we heard about a lot of manual processes, they have to do interviews and call individuals to check in, to have a formed opinion, fact-finding interviews around the adjudication. Now we'll have a form in that portal, so when someone files for unemployment, they answered all those questions up front, and the adjudication officer can actually look at those answers and kind of figure out if this person's eligible and what additional information that they're needed. So those are a couple of the things, but I really look forward to working with JLARC in the next couple months, obviously working with legislators to figure out how we can build a best-in-class unemployment insurance system and really move forward to make sure that all Virginians who are eligible for unemployment benefits can receive these benefits in a timely manner.
Thank you, Secretary Healy. We are running over schedule quite a bit, but do members have quick questions they want to ask the Secretary?
Mr. Chair.
Senator Norman.
try to be succinct. Mine is more a comment in response to a couple of assertions on it. From my myopic perspective, I have not been overly impressed with the timeliness of substantive interaction between your department and the VEC, and that may be attributable to the infancy of that secretariat. But you talk about amazing. Let me tell you what's amazing. I'm respectful that the VEC has gotten thousands of calls, but if you aggregate what 140 legislators have received in telephone calls from people that are absolutely desperate, that comparison wanes with VEC with what the General Assembly members have gone through. You made the assertion that the unemployment benefits have allowed people to pay rent and electrical bills. The reality is many of them are not paying rent. Many of them are not paying rent. We did forgiveness on certain electrical bills and put it on the major electrical provider, and those things are not happening. The number one priority from my world as a legislator is for our VEC to continue what they are doing to get the benefits and to straighten the situation out, which is an incredible administrative burden. But the number two thing is we need to get people back to work so we don't have to worry so much about unemployment insurance. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. It's just a brief question on the modernization of the new system. The automatic text and email notifications is not included. Is there a legal barrier, cost barrier? And then if not, will that be hopefully something that is included, because we all just know people's lives are complicated, and especially with COVID. I know personally that I'm working a lot off the phone dealing with a family member who's very ill, so love to know about that part of it.
Yes, no, that's a great question. So really, I talk about October 1 is really finalizing this UI mod program that we've been working on for years. Obviously, it was put on hold during the pandemic. And then I now talk about October 2nd, right? So again, we have to continuous improvement is one of our things we are learning, thanks to JLARC and working with our peer states. What do their systems have? How do they communicate? How do we better communicate? And what forms we do communicate with? And so that is definitely with our chatbots that we're looking at. I've already talked to different companies about that. I would love a chatbot in different languages. Like, how do we even communicate with language access is one of these pieces we are working on as well. And then the ARPA funds, the $29.8 million, that's what it's going to do. It's going to do those upgrades to better communicate with individuals, make it easier for those individuals to file a claim, as well as kind of support all the back office work that we need to do.
Mr. Chairman. I think so, Mr. Chairman, but you never know. No, sir. Yeah. But Mr. Chairman, I think what we've seen through all of this is the fact that VEC had a number of issues pre-COVID. If nothing else, when I look at the fact on slide 13, it speaks to 1985 was when their IT system went in. I'll just make an observation. I was getting my master's degree and using an Apple IIgs system, which if anybody wants a boat anchor, see me. I've still got the computer. Is the new system that's going to go into effect a resilient system that should last another 40 years without updating? That part's facetious, but is it a resilient system? And that's going to be a two-part question, Mr. Chairman. And the second, I hope that we will see from the administration, whether legislatively or otherwise, a plan, as JLARC is going to come back with recommendations for oversight, but a plan that elevates VEC prospectively to an agency that doesn't have the problems in IT, that doesn't have the problems with adjudication rates dropping, even as filings for adjudication are dropping, things of that nature.
Yes, and so what's launching October 1, I think is a really, really good start to a vision. If it's through our IT system, through our communication and how we work with our Virginians, that have to file for unemployment. I'm looking forward to working with JLARC and the legislators about, especially the ARPA funds with the $29 million I mentioned, to also add additional improvements to our technology system, our call center work, our adjudication officers, and continue to work with that. So I think it's an excellent step. It's going to solve a lot of the issues we saw during the pandemic, but we'll be working closely with our peer states, Department of Labor. I also think, again, these are Department of Labor rules, and so there needs to be reform at the federal level. We know what important safety net this is for Virginians, for everyone across the country, and so we have been in conversations. I have a call with them, Department of Labor. We've talked to Senator Kane's office, but there needs to be also some support and changes at the federal level to make sure that these individuals who need this system the most have better access.
Yeah, Doug Austin has the final question.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Hill, thank you for being here today. Just to expand a little bit on what Senator Norman said, I've received multiple calls from people that I am very much concerned for their safety. I mean, their backs are to the wall, and with the loss of life and COVID and the illness associated with COVID and everything people are dealing with, we just have to put this on the front burner and get it fixed. I mean, it is an issue of grave concern, and I do understand the situation associated with what VEC has had to deal with, and it's overwhelming, no doubt. But we've just got to get this fixed for the people's safety. Thank you, Megan.
I agree with you.
Thank you, Ken.
So we thank the staff and we thank the Secretary for this interim report. A reminder that we will have another report in November. That will be a time during which the Secretary's office and VEC and the staff can work together so that we don't just hear about what the problems are, but we hear what has been resolved. I might tell you all that in relation to the comments that have made so far, we have a sense of how things are going because our offices get these calls all the time. So in fact, if we can come back in November and realize that those calls in our offices have dropped, we'll be very happy with the outcome of this effort.
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman.
Director Greer, what else do we have?
If I could just, for 1 second, turn it over to Tracy to just clarify a couple of things that were said by Secretary Healy. I think it's important for the public to hear that and for you to hear that as members. So,
very quick.
Tracy.
Thanks, Hal. Mr. Chairman, sorry to prolong this, but we did just want to clarify for you all, since there is a vast difference in the $87 million figure that the Secretary stated regarding improper payments and the estimate of $930 million, which our staff presented. We just wanted to clarify for you what the difference is there. So the $87 million is the confirmed amount of overpayments, or improper payments, I should say. The $930 million, which again is just for 2020, is an estimate, which we cited was an estimate. It is using a federal government methodology. It does not account for the backlogs that still need to be gone through, the cases that are still in appeals, or the issues that were bypassed during COVID that still have to be revisited. And so once those are included in the estimate, that is how we achieve the $930 million estimate, which is certainly exponentially greater than the $87 million confirmed amount that the Secretary is citing. The other thing I just wanted to clarify for you all, I think the Secretary said that it is certainly their goal during the blackout period for individuals to be able to submit claims, VEC staff to be able to process claims, but we were told as late as on Friday that during the blackout period, when the UI system is converted over to the new system, nobody will be able to access the system. This includes claimants filing initial claims or continuing claims. It also includes VEC staff who will not be able to have access to the system to work on those claims. And we do think that's extremely important for our members to understand, because certainly your constituents are going to be impacted by that blackout period. So that's all I had, just in terms of clarification.
Thank you. Al?
Mr. Chairman, the last item on the agenda today is a brief summary of an actuarial review JLARC oversaw of the State Employee Health Insurance Program. This review was directed by the Appropriation Act from the 2020 General Assembly session. The impetus of the review was concern on the part of the money committees that the cash balance for the health insurance fund supporting this program, which is supported by premiums paid by employers and employees, has continued to grow in recent years. The review was conducted by the General Assembly's actuary, GRS Consulting. The purpose of the review was, 1, to assess the actuarial assumptions and methods used by the Department of Human Resource Management's actuary, AON, and 2, to determine the appropriate target balance for the health insurance fund. I'd like now to introduce Jim Pransky, who is the Senior Healthcare Consultant and Actuary at GRS, who conducted the review. Lance Weiss, who is a Senior Consultant from GRS, is also on the line. Mr. Pransky will be presenting to you virtually. You're still able to ask questions or make comments, but just a reminder to turn on your mic so that he can hear you. And Mr. Pransky, I hope you're with us now. I would ask you maybe to take your, is he with us?
Yes, I'm here.
I ask you maybe take your 10-minute presentation and make it 5 and just hit the absolute highlights and give the commission the bottom line, if you would, please.
Okay. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. I thank you for the opportunity to present the results that we've been working on for the last 3 or 4 months. Mr. Greer already gave you the summary of my background. Lance has provided peer review throughout the process, and it's going to be helping me with the slides. The executive summary, we reviewed the active and the pre-65 retiree segment for the state employee health insurance program. That's the vast majority of it. There is some fully insured, and the Medicare portion of the fund also that was not reviewed. We looked at the assumptions and methods and found them to be perfectly acceptable. There's a whole slew of things that go through in determining rates, and what we found from Aon is that the processes and the assumptions that they used were fine. The bottom line here is that the program is actuarially sound. The health insurance fund has sufficient assets to cover the current and future healthcare obligations, but there is room to reduce that. Lance, can you next slide, please? Thank you. We'll just skip the agenda and just go on. Okay. The purpose of the review, as Mr. Greer, was to look at the rating methodology, how the rates were determined, and also, maybe more importantly, is to look at the level of the health insurance fund. Next slide. As I mentioned, the assumptions and methods and underlying data all met the expectations of this review and of the rate setting. Generally accepted actuarial principles are followed. The health insurance fund, the money going into it and coming out of it, all flowed exactly as was expected. The underlying principles, I think we can just pass through that one. The results are that Aon used reasonable and appropriate measurements. We not only look at what the trends are for the health insurance system, but also what's going on in the environment. One of the difficulties that we have had, as you mentioned, previous exercises or the previous presenters talk about COVID. COVID also hit this claim or rate development, and so there were some difficulties there. There's two major things, actually 3 things that go on in the health insurance fund. First of all, it is just a cash flow process where money comes from the system and flows through the health insurance fund. The participants' contributions also flow through the fund, and then claims and administration come out. So that's just a cash flow process. But the other thing that it does is it holds the actuarial liabilities. There are claims that have been incurred during a period, during a fiscal year, that are unpaid as of the end of the fiscal year. Aon estimates those, and money is set aside to pay those. In addition to that, there is a contingency reserve that is set aside for things that go awry, okay? In the COVID situation, the claims actually were lower, but if we had a situation that was just the opposite, this contingency reserve would come into play. The last bullet item here is that the sum of the actuarial liabilities, which are the estimated claim reserves, and the contingency reserve is $226 million. At the end of the fiscal year 2021, the health insurance fund had $420 million, which indicates that there is room to reduce that. So our recommendations is that we monitor the health insurance fund and set targets. Every year, Aon produces a report called Actuarial Liabilities and Reserves, and that was the $226 million that was estimated on the previous slide. And the recommendation is that you monitor that and maybe look at 110 to 125% of that recommended level. Maybe a little higher this year because COVID is still running amok in our society, that maybe you need a little bit more. The way to monitor and to adjust the health insurance fund are through premium holidays, which have been used in the last 2 fiscal years. A premium holiday essentially is that the budget premium is not input into the health insurance fund and the participants are not required to pay. There have been 2 in the last 2 years, and that helps bring down the health insurance fund. Another way to do that is through a smoothing process, and basically that's just a process to look at how far the claims and the administration have been off from what was projected in the rate setting methodology. You kind of do this already because you don't always take the increase that is recommended by Aon. The last couple of years, you've taken approximately half of what was recommended. Okay, that was a quick nutshell. If you have questions, this is the time.
All right, Al, if we have questions, you answer them.
Any questions of the members?
All
Thank
right.
you very much, Mr. Pransky.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, that concludes our agenda for today. The next meeting is Monday, October the 18th. The October meeting, we will present the findings from our review of guardianships and conservatorships. We'll provide you with an interim report on our tax progressivity study, and we'll provide our annual spending report. Thank you very much for your time today.
No other business to come before the commission. We will stand adjourned. Thank you all very much for your participation today.